to some of the most pressing international issues during meetings with world leaders today and tomorrow. We've got Fiona G now reporting live from Calgary. Fiona, good afternoon, please. What's the latest?
Don, you're absolutely right. The G7 Summit of 2025 has officially kicked off here in Alberta, Canada. At the beginning of the summit, we saw a bilateral meeting between Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and President Donald Trump. Now, of course, a key topic that's going to be prevalent throughout this summit is the Middle East. Here's what President Trump had to say when asked about Iran. Listen.
They'd like to talk, but they should have done that before. Say Iran is not winning this war. And they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
And President Trump has also indicated that he has heard from intermediaries that Iran does want to come back to the table to talk. Interestingly, however, just today during an interview with CNN, the Israeli president actually said he believed Iran was just using these talks as a front to continue advancing its nuclear weapons programs. Listen.
You can speak peaceful, diplomatic, and on the other hand, underneath, you move forward to the bomb. And that was exactly the situation. What we are doing is contributing substantially to the defense and security interests of all Western and free world countries.
And President Trump has reiterated that the U.S. has always strongly supported Israel and that he believes Israel is doing very well. But when asked what it would take for the U.S. to get involved militarily in the Middle East, he did not give a clear answer. Now, looking more closely at specifically U.S.-Canada talks, President Trump said that top of the agenda for U.S. and Canada is trade. Look.
I think we're going to accomplish a lot. And I expect to, and I think our primary focus will be trade and trade with Canada, and I'm sure we can work something out.
Now, President Trump says that he himself, as we've heard a lot before, likes tariffs because he believes they're simple and they're effective. He said that Prime Minister Carney's ideas for U.S.-Canada trade were very complex, but he did say that they were not bad ideas. Now, one reporter asked the president if he thought it would be possible for some sort of U.S.-Canada agreement within days or weeks. President Trump said that that was indeed possible, but that both sides would have to come to some sort of agreement. Now, it's also interesting to note here that the topic of G7 membership was also brought up during that meeting. President Trump said he believed Russia should have never been removed from what was then known as the G8. Listen.
The G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in. Then I would say that that was a mistake because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in.
Trump did say that he believed at this point Russia shouldn't be allowed immediately back into the G7 because too much has happened over the past couple of years. One reporter also asked President Trump if he would be open to China joining the G7. President Trump said that he was not opposed to that idea if anyone brought it up, but he did say that China needs to bring people to the table who are actually willing to talk. Don?
Now, Fiona, after that bilateral meeting, Prime Minister Carney made some remarks before the beginning of session 1 of the summit. What do you have there?
That's right. The G7 is now entering its first multilateral working session of the summit. At the beginning of that session, Prime Minister Carney made some opening remarks where he highlighted one of the earliest goals of the G7, which was to help former communist countries integrate into the free Western world. Listen.
Following the fall of the Berlin Wall, the G7 gathered to integrate those countries that had been behind the Iron Curtain of communism and to accelerate the flow of capital and trade to the developing world.
The Prime Minister said that this summit is taking place during a key turning point in world history. He said that he was honored to be working alongside world leaders, including President Trump, who are willing to rise up to that challenge. The Prime Minister also said, quote, there can be no security without economic prosperity. So, of course, world economy is going to be a big topic of discussion both today and tomorrow as well. Now, a quick look before we go at President Trump's schedule. He is expected to be speaking with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer at 2 p.m. local time. That'll be 4 p.m. Eastern. Don, back to you.
Okay, Fiona, thank you very much for the report. And joining us now for further analysis on this year's G7 summit is Daniel Lacalle, Chief Economist Tresses, and as well author for the book Freedom or Equality. So Daniel, first of all, good afternoon to you. To start off, can we talk about, from your perspective, what would you say is President Trump's role right now at the G7?
Thank you very much. I think that the main role of President Trump right now is to get the trading partners to achieve positive trade negotiations and to start really delivering on the promise of supporting free trade, free enterprise, and freedom for individuals. I think that it's very, very important to see a drastic change in the G7 that has gradually moved to a very interventionist, almost neo-Keynesian type of strategy, trying to probably because of fear, sometimes because of, trying to accommodate to the narrative of activists to disseminate the very wrong ideas of socialism. So I think that what's most important here is to bring back the G7 to defend free markets, free enterprise, and individual freedom, and to abandon wokeism.
Okay, let me ask you one thing specifically. So Trump said at the summit that trade with Canada will be among the key topics discussed, and added that a potential deal is achievable. You have any thoughts on that, where things are going, Daniel?
Yeah, I think that we have two very important deals that could be announced or closed during or very close to the end of the G7 summit. Number one is the Japan deal. I think that that is probably the one that is the most advanced and simplest of them all, because I think that the Japanese Prime Minister is very, very focused on getting a trade deal that is going to be positive for both nations, for the United States and Japan as well. I think that the trade deal with Canada, it could be one of the easiest ones to finish and to complete, but it seems that the new Canadian government is not so keen on lifting its non-tariff barriers, and it continues to be very much about maintaining that enormous level of regulatory and legislative burdens that have crippled the trade between the United States and Canada. So I think that that is likely to be a little bit more difficult. And we have just heard, anyhow, some positive, and I think that certainly, I would say, encouraging words from both President Trump and Prime Minister Carney about the likelihood of reaching an agreement. I think it would be very simple if Canada only adhered to the idea of lifting its non-tariff barriers. I think it's going to be a little bit more complicated if they continue to be stubbornly focused on maintaining their regulatory burdens and their enormous so-called environmental burdens.
Okay, Daniel, of course, we cannot ignore the fact that this is happening amid the backdrop of Middle East conflict, right? Do you see the G7 playing a role as a mediator in the Israel-Iran conflict, or not so much?
I think the G7 role is very important. I think that we cannot underestimate the importance of what the United States and the main economies in the world can do in order to mitigate the risk of this conflict spreading out. I think that it's also very significant what we just heard from President Trump about reaching out to China and to Russia, because there's no solution to the Iran-Israel conflict if China and Russia don't stop the Iranian regime from continuing to develop its policy and its strategy of expanding and obliterating, annihilating, as they say, Israel. So I think that the G7 role is very important. It needs to be decisive, it needs to be proactive, and it needs to be about bringing Iran to a solution that eliminates the risk of a nuclear war, and certainly of the use of its nuclear program for military purposes.
Okay, another elephant in the room, in my opinion, is that Trump has increased tariffs on some of the G7 partners. Do you think that's going to play into the dynamics of the meeting? Is there going to be tensions because of that?
Of course, there will be tensions, but there's one thing that we know so far is that none of the trading partners of the United States in the G7 have denied their enormous non-tariff barriers and have denied the calculation that the Trump administration made about the cost of tariffs, of the reciprocal tariffs. Therefore, I think that there's plenty of room for negotiation. I think it will be very positive to see Japan reaching a trade deal with the United States, and I think it will be very positive as well if Canada reaches at least a principle of agreement. So yes, I think it will be something that will be discussed, and something that will be discussed quite openly and with obviously different positions. But I think that what's most important about it is that the G7 summit ends with a clear commitment to defending economic freedom, free trade, and free enterprise. If those three things are clear commitments for the G7, the United States will also reach positive agreements with all of those nations.
Okay, with that being said, can you just reiterate or elaborate on the level of unity within the group as of right now? Do trade talks within the G7 affect its ability to focus on different challenges like China and other issues?
I think that there is a significant difference between the United States, the UK, and other G7 partners about the position relative to China. I think that it's very evident that the United States sees the risk of Chinese government that is closing the economy, but is also advancing in a more interventionist policy and strategy, particularly also with the rest of the world, relative to, for example, the European G7 members that have a more, let's say, benign view about the position with China. So I think that trade differences are likely to be a very significant part, but also the approach to negotiating and to reaching cooperation with China is likely to be an element of at least disagreement. But I believe that we will finish the summit with positive results. I think that the way that things are developing and the headlines that we're getting are actually a lot more, I would say, encouraging than one would have imagined only a month ago.
All right, then let's end on this positive note. Thank you very much, Dan.